Good morning. Welcome. It's September the 4th, 9 o'clock. Welcome to the September meeting of the Riverfront Design Committee. May we have roll call, please?
Paul Dudman.
Present.
Anthony Black.
Here.
Kenny Dennis.
Here.
Brian Doherty.
Here.
John Joyce. Don Kasperite. Richie Splitt. And David Jost. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes of our meeting on August the 7th of this year. The minutes were in your packet. If you have any questions, changes, otherwise we'll entertain a motion for approval. Moved by Mr. Yost, seconded by Mr. Doherty. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Item 3, cases withdrawn. There are none. Item 4, continuance requests. There are none. Item 5, consent docket. We have no items. Item 6, cases for individual consideration. We have no items. Item 7A, other business, bylaws, review and approve of proposed revisions. Okay.
Yeah, I will go over that in a minute. I wanted to introduce Brandon Milland, who is the new staff person for Scenic River.
Good morning. Nice to have you with us.
Yeah, Brandon has worked for the planning department for about 2.5 years, and he was in long-range planning and came across the floor to join current planning to work on design review and updating design guidelines. So this will be his show moving forward.
Oh, moving forward or today?
Well, sort of today, but we don't have any cases. So.
Well, I mean, as far as the bylaws.
The bylaws, yeah, he's informed and I'm as informed as I will be. But I'll introduce this. I mentioned last time that it came to our attention recently that there was a draft of revised bylaws that hadn't, as far as we could tell, it hadn't ever been moved forward. It existed as a draft. Obviously, neither me nor Brandon we didn't have any background on kind of how we got to this point, so we wanted to bring it to the committee, affirm, assuming that you guys have some institutional memory on how we got to this point. As far as I can tell, these revisions bring your bylaws into similar minor changes in organization of the other design districts.
That's what I understand.
Okay.
No.
So that's my impression, but again, I wanted to rely on the committee's memory of the intent before some of these changes will require an actual ordinance amendment to integrate through. So before we did all that work, I wanted to get the committee's feedback.
Okay. As far as the committee is concerned, did anyone have any questions or comments with regard to these?
I did notice there are still a couple of question marks that are marked throughout the document, and I didn't know if those were questions directly to us, or if they're hold items under term in Section 2,
right.
The question after full term under meetings on Section 1 of Article 4, there's a chair or chairman note. The specific that I do, the latest discussion that we had was with respect to should and shall with respect to professionals being on the board, and I believe that has been correctly brought. The intent that we were discussing, I think, is correctly amended in this document. But with respect to the question marks, I didn't know if those were directed to us or if those were holdovers for
yeah, well, let's start.
Discussion.
I think the first question mark, Section 2, on page 1.
The idea being that you would be off a full 3-year term is what I think is intended.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
That's the intent.
Right.
Okay.
So the question mark can go.
Right.
And then special meetings may be held at the call of the chairman, and then there's a question about chair. I saw in other locations it was chairman and vice chair, so chairman seems to be consistent throughout the document. Vice chair rather than vice chairman seems to be consistent. I think that chairman could remain and chair with the question mark could be struck.
Anyone have any problems with that?
I will confirm. What's consistent if
Yeah,
the other districts are using chair or chairman.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is the consistency, whether it's chairman or chair.
Yeah, I agree. That was all I had.
Anything else, Ann?
Yeah, was there something else, Tony, on the... Okay.
Any other questions or comments with regard to the proposed changes?
Yeah, but what's everyone else do? What was the intent? Did you say it's one full 3-year term? Oh, yes. Yeah.
Otherwise?
I just had one question when I was going through it. On section 7, page 4 of 9, and there's an added place that says at the very first sentence, it says decisions of the committee, and they've added or staff. I'm assuming that means that appropriately, if the staff can do it now and has latitude, because before it was always decisions of the committee.
Yes, that's the intent, and I think in something else it says or staff, comma, if applicable or as applicable.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether it ought to say as applicable or something of that, because right now somebody could read it that the staff could or the committee could, and I think the intent is that the committee does where appropriate and the staff does where appropriate.
Right. Okay, I'll confirm that.
I think that one item worth noting on that is that I know that there's administrative approvals for certain defined elements. We didn't realize it, and it was one of our hotter discussions when the starting structure for the boathouses became apparent that went through without any review, only because its footprint fell within what was allowed under administrative approval. So at that point, there was some discussion about, well, I agree that structures that are so small, obviously there should be latitude for administrative approval, but structures that are so small but that much prominence might require. So I don't know if that language was ever amended to close that loophole.
And that was what I was remembering just about that whole thing, and I thought if we can do it some way where it says where applicable or fall in line with the guidelines.
Okay, back to section 7, I will confirm, I will check back on the other committees and see how they're wording this as appropriate. But back on the boathouses, was the discussion, did you want to shrink
No.
the limit?
So it was so far past. It was just a specific condition in which we found out, we realized that the starting structure for the boathouse never came before this committee, and when asked, it was after the fact, the response was, well, the footprint fell within the administrative approvals realm or authority or judgment. And so there was a request at that point that there is an area in which, even though it might meet the written requirements of okay by administrative approval, that it probably should still come before the committee. And I don't know if there was any discussion about that, any amendment in any document. I don't think I ever saw any.
I don't think there ever was.
I'm sorry? Yeah, that's what, yeah. Yeah, somewhere, I've been referring to downtown just because it's right here, and I don't immediately see it, but somewhere there's a section that says, staff may forward cases that are otherwise eligible for administrative review. They may refer them to the committee to catch special things like that. But I will follow up.
Okay, so from your viewpoint, do you want us to, assuming everyone's in agreement, to approve these changes subject to these clarifications, or would you prefer, I don't know what your timetable is, would you prefer that they be clarified and then we vote on it at the next meeting?
I would prefer to collect comments and come back for for a final.
So do we need to take any action at all then as far as...
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? David?
Yeah, I have a question about Article 5, Section 1, attempts to influence members outside of meetings. I understand the pitfalls of that, but an absolute prohibition against any discussion whatsoever outside of a meeting, that bothers me a little bit.
But isn't that an ordinance? Isn't that a...
It's kind of consistent with, parts of it are consistent with the Open Meeting Act, if you were talking to another member of the committee, because the idea is that all discussion about an application should occur here. If you were talking to a member of the public that wasn't the application, you're allowed to do that. You're not allowed, of course, to promise a particular result or anything that you wouldn't do anyway. But it seems that maybe it was put here for that reason, to be consistent with the restrictions of the Open Meeting Act and committee members not discussing it among themselves or committee members discussing it with applicants.
And I have, correct me if this is wrong, yeah, sometimes I think, well, that's a little, it doesn't seem productive to not be able to discuss the case with other businesses, with other committee members, but oftentimes projects are discussed before they're submitted, and before there's a case, they can be discussed however, in whatever format, however long, is that? So oftentimes people come in for like a pre-application process, and at that point I encourage them to do whatever networking and information gathering they need to do, because they can do it freely if it's not a case.
Sort of, and it's also...
Staff freely discusses issues with people that have cases before coming before the commission. Staff has no constraints where that kind of thing is concerned, correct?
We discuss it with the applicant.
The difference is, let's say that you had a lot of conversation with the applicant or with people who had a vested interest. You might have a conflict when it came back before the body, because at that point you had given so much input that, not even officially, but you kind of had a stake in the outcome because you talked about it that much with that person. So it appears that it's designed to avoid that kind of thing.
Oh, and also, isn't it a protection? Because if anyone asks me about a particular thing, I just say I can't discuss it.
It is a protection. That's a good point.
It doesn't put any member of the committee on the spot either.
Bring
I
the
could say I...
discuss it.
Yeah.
I understand that part of the call, but I've been discussing issues with congressmen, councilmen, all my adult life. Not necessarily lobbying on my own behalf.
No, I'm true.
That's a little bit stringent, but I understand exactly the legal position.
Yes, sir.
But this wouldn't limit the committee's ability to ask questions to staff prior to meeting. Say
no.
you received the agenda and you had some clarifications that were to be made.
No,
So that type
staff
of
is
conversation is...
For that purpose. They could ask staff all day, every day. Just not together. And you've not seen group emails because, of course, you can't do that. Yeah.
David, did that answer was your concern that you're often asked, or was your concern that the committee could provide some important information or feedback outside of the meeting? Well,
Lisa, you will get back with us with those comments at the next meeting, or answers, or clarifications, I guess,
yes.
in those cases.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will move on to item 7B, which is a resolution acknowledging Scotty Montgomery for her years of service to the Riverfront Design Committee. Lisa suggested that I read the resolution into the record, and then we can vote on it. A resolution of the Riverfront Design Committee of the City of Oklahoma City acknowledging Scotty Montgomery for her valuable service and dedication. Whereas Scotty Montgomery reliably contributed careful and thoughtful work to serve the citizens of Oklahoma City in her role as Associate Planner in the Oklahoma City Planning Department from January 2006 to June 2014, and as Secretary of the Riverfront Design Committee from November 2007 to June 2014. And whereas Scotty Montgomery advanced the City of Oklahoma City's urban design function and the scenic river design review process from its infancy, thereby creating a lasting positive impact on the form and function of the city. And whereas Scotty Montgomery contributed much to the committee through her comprehensive knowledge and adept analysis of urban design, architectural design, historical preservation, and aesthetic sensibility. And whereas the committee benefited greatly from her expertise and thoughtfulness in reviewing and recommending cases. And whereas Scotty Montgomery demonstrated uncommon dedication to the committee and the citizens of Oklahoma City through her methodical attention to detail and earnest regard for making the city a better and more beautiful place. And whereas Scotty Montgomery earned admiration from the committee and colleagues for her thoughtfully formed and gratefully articulated opinions. And whereas Scotty Montgomery consistently treated applicants, citizens, committee members, and staff with courtesy and respect, and whereas Scotty Montgomery's intelligence, humor, sincerity, collaborative spirit, and great attitude served the community well, and whereas Scotty Montgomery made a marked difference in the community and in the lives of her family, friends, co-workers, colleagues, and citizens, and whereas Scotty Montgomery will be dearly missed. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Riverfront Design Committee hereby respectfully honors the late Scotty Montgomery, who lived from November the 15th, 1943 to June the 24th, 2014, for her outstanding service to the Riverfront Design Committee of the City of Oklahoma City, adopted by the Riverfront Design Committee of the City of Oklahoma City on this 4th day of September, 2014. There is our resolution. Consider a motion for approval.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Splitt, seconded by Mr. Doherty. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. I know, I knew so. I'd also like to mention, which I should have done earlier, that Mr. Richie Splitt joined the meeting just after we had roll call. Moving on, item 8, communications. Item 8A, number 1, administered approval report. There is one item, SRCA-14-00010 at 1920 South Meridian Avenue. Anyone have any questions or comments on that? Item B, comments from the planning staff. Anything?
Scotty's daughter. We had a really interesting meeting with Blair Humphreys and some folks about the Wheeler District, and they're talking about just how it's actually going to physically happen and the design guidelines for it. They are intending to come for the November meeting to bounce some ideas, nothing for approval per se, but to discuss some ideas on how it might be rezoned or maybe carved out into a separate PUD or maybe a separate district like the other riverfront districts. Again, just all ideas, and I encourage them to come discuss it with the commission to get their insights.
Would that be something that maybe the staff could provide us what options are? I mean, do you know in advance or?
We talked about every option under the sun. And so I will confirm with them if they want to narrow that down in their discussion. That's a good suggestion.
Can we do that if there's not a formal application?
Yeah, it's just for discussion. There's no action item.
Okay.
So you would give input. None of your input, it would be binding per se, because it's not an action. Is that right?
And then when I guess they're sort of testing the waters. Then they'll put an application in based upon how they feel the wind's blowing?
Yeah, that might be not just the wind, but I was explaining to them that this committee has just vast knowledge on the intent of the district and how all the pieces are supposed to fit together. So I said, you guys have to come have a conversation.
Yeah. Anyone have any thoughts or comments on that? Okay.
Is that sculpture possible?
It's
If you have one, put some hair on it, please. Thank you. Okay, so that'll be November, right?
Yeah, we're targeting November.
Okay.
As with projects, things tend to slide, but hopefully November.
Anything else from planning? Item C, comments from committee members?
I think just because this has been brought up about the revision in the ordinance and all, I don't know how many of you remember, I imagine all of us remember, that there have been a number of issues dealing with landscape over the last, 7 to 8 years, whatever. And Scotty, right before one of her last meetings, I think her last meeting, it's really unfortunate, she had really recognized a lot of that and had said, let's get together and let's really kind of iron out some of that. And she, I think really recognized where I think we still have some projects that have never been implemented that were approved on some city property. I think the pumping station and some of that I don't think ever got done after it was approved. And then there were other ones where things would come in but landscaping was never really, it seemed like held that serious or held to the same standard as what the rest of the facility was. So I just think we ought to keep that in mind, because I think if we don't, we're going to continue to have some of these come in. And to be honest with you, at the end of the day, the landscaping plays an integral part in what the whole design guidelines we're trying to achieve. So I think Scotty recognized it, and it was unfortunate because Scotty had then been back in touch with me and I think was kind of excited about turning around and really honing in on where some of the fallacies were. And so.
Well, Brian, you're our landscaping policeman, so.
I just, if we have the ordinance and we're trying to do it, then I think we ought to do it. You look at some communities and they'll have it, and boy, it looks like $1 million after it, and you go to other communities and you sit there and you say, I can't believe, this was not taken seriously because it's kind of in for the groundbreaking and then it's out after that. And I don't think that was ever the intent of the landscaping.
I agree with that. On checking things out, is there actually a procedure, or do you know, for follow-up on these things to see that they're actually done? Like 5 years, not that we've been around 5 years, but looking to see after 5 years on any of these committees whether what people agreed to do they've actually done.
Yeah, if it's on the CA, if it was made a condition or if it was recorded in the staff report and the CA and the approved drawings, when it at the time the CA expires, that triggers a notification for Paula to call the inspectors so that they go out and make sure that what was approved, that what was installed is what was approved. Now, that people could, funding falls through, et cetera. Just because you get a permit doesn't mean you have to build whatever. But if you do build it, it's got to be as per approved plans. So the CA expires, 2 years? And then Paula notifies the inspector. But it may be close to a year before the inspector gets out there.
But I think some of this was more like the pumping station down on Meridian, and there was a lot of discussion about the landscape. To the best of my knowledge, the landscape never went in, and it was talked about again. We have a parking lot that's over there. There's some of those, and some of those are city, but I think if the ordinance is that everybody's supposed to, then I think one is follow-up, and one is the initial installation, because one day it said, as per getting the landscape instructions from city clerk's office, So I thought, well, I'll just go down and try to find out how to do this. And I spent over 2 hours waiting for them to dig up what there was because they couldn't really find it, and it ended up going back on some minutes. So I just think that those type of things ought to be very seamless and they ought to be very appropriate. And I think there's some things that don't jive within the city. I mean, it had as per city clerk, you go down there, and I went down there, said, we don't know anything about this, and it went and went and went. And then it had to do with the landscape requirements that were required, and it says, as per this document in city clerk's office, and city clerk's office couldn't find it. And then they finally found it in the minutes of something. So I just think those type of things, because if I'm somebody trying to do that, and there's a lot of times people are wanting to do the right thing, we need to make sure that that's seamless and that they can do that. And I think that's where Scotty recognized, because she was aware of that. And
okay. Any other comments? Next item, item D, the next meeting date is Thursday, October the 2nd. I know we have the bylaw situation. Is there anything else that's, do we have applications?
Yeah, we have applications. I think they're all AA, small stuff. So
should we, is there any reason why the bylaws couldn't be approved in November? I mean,
there's no hurry. From our standpoint, there's no hurry.
I'm just thinking about, I mean, I know we need to have meetings, but at the same time, having people come all the way down here for an item that is not, I mean,
Sure.
if it's an agenda item and
Yeah.
someone wants something
Right.
done, that's one thing.
Yeah, I'm like, do you know for sure? Yeah, we'll confirm.
Or you'll let us know anyway, right? Okay, but my point is, I guess unless anyone wants it, I don't see the reason for having the meeting just to approve the bylaws. I mean,
Yeah.
if that's not a...
It's not pressing.
Anything else? Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Mr. Yost, second by Mr. Blatt. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much.